My name is Scott McCachren, and I live here in East Hampton Village, and I've been here for just over 5 years. We are at the First Presbyterian Church of East Hampton, and I am the pastor here. The first thing that went through my mind was that we needed to be ahead of it and ensure that we were able to provide a safe worship environment. Not knowing yet how things were going to develop, we started off by putting things in our bulletin telling people that we weren't going to do our passing of the peace for a while until this passed. We asked people not to shake hands at first. I was afraid that they would think I was overreacting because it was in the news, but it hadn't hit the East End yet. And I didn't want to be ahead of the game too much, but I didn't find that to be true at all. They completely understood and all along have been very much willing to do what we need to do to manage our church during the pandemic. Well, in the Presbyterian Church, each of the churches have a lot of autonomy on how we manage our own affairs. So it really was up to our session, which is our governing body within this congregation, and myself to determine how we were going to respond. The session immediately determined, once it became clear that things were getting worse, that we were going to close. The first week, that allowed me to come into the church, and I had some very good volunteers that helped with the audio and the video, and we were able to get something up on YouTube that very first week on Sunday, which was great. But then that week, the session decided that we're not going to allow anyone in the buildings but employees, no volunteers. So that meant that I really had to ramp up my own ability to do these things. I had a series of outdoor office hours, is what we called it, when a couple of times a week I would set up a circle of chairs outside of our session house and invite people to come. And the chairs were 6 feet apart and we wore masks, but it gave us at least a chance for people to come, be with the pastor, be with each other, and talk about what they're experiencing. And for some of the people in the church, that made all the difference for them, because the sense of community and fellowship in a church is vitally important to a lot of people that are involved in the church, and you can't just turn that off. So we did that, and I also did a series that I called our Tuesday parking lot devotions, where I had an FM transmitter, and I would stand in the parking lot and do a devotional series, and people would come and park in the parking lot, tune in their radio to the correct channel, and they could listen to our devotions. And I even served communion that way a couple of times outdoors. So we did as much as we could outdoors. We did as much as we could online. It still wasn't the same, but it was something. Yeah, well, early on, one of the main things that I focused on was the palpable sense of fear that people had, and also the isolation. In fact, at first it was more about the fear because none of us knew where this was going. But then as a little bit of time went on, and not really a lot of time, isolation became really a problem for people as much as anything else. We've got people that live alone, that are virtually homebound, and sometimes their church community was about the only community that they had. And so to talk about the feelings of isolation that we all shared, the sense of displacement that people felt, those were the topics of many of my sermons, and those are topics that I really wouldn't have preached about before the pandemic began. We focus a lot of our conversation on some of our elderly members, but our youth, they were isolated as well. And the friendships that youth form, I'm talking about teenagers here, junior and senior high school students. The friendships that they have they feel like they're just as important to them as their own families. And they were separated from each other. And often youth group and our mission trips is an outlet for them to come in and be with their church friends, and we weren't able to do it either. We had some online ways of addressing our youth, getting them together online, but it's just not the same when they're used to playing games with each other and tussling and us joking around with them, and we just couldn't do that anymore. So it's not just the outreach, it's our inreach as well, but all of it just was so much more difficult, and in some cases, like our Cuba partnership and our mission trips, we just weren't able to do it. In one of my outdoor office hour settings, I was speaking one-on-one with one of our parishioners, And their comments just were, this is so hard on everyone, and it's not just the getting sick, because even if I never get sick, I'm living differently than I lived before, and my life has changed, and I don't know if it's ever going to go back. And it was at that moment that I realized our mission as a church had to change during this time, that we needed to reach into people's homes and into their lives in ways that we had never invented before, and that's going to have to continue, hopefully even beyond the pandemic, because the tools that we have developed as a result of the pandemic are tools that we should be able to continue to leverage to reach into the community. This is blooming into something not just harder for the church, but something different for the church. And that it was a time that we really needed to step up and reconsider our whole mission. And that perhaps it was a permanent change in our mission to meet people where they are instead of having them come to us. It's interesting because I don't want to give a negative word, because in the church we are believers in grace that's always there for us. I don't want to give a positive word because it's a terrible, tragic pandemic that has caused so much pain. But as a believing organization, as a believing person, I have to lean on Christ. And my answer is that it has been an opportunity. The pandemic has been an opportunity for the church, as I've mentioned in a couple of different ways, to find new ways to serve our community. The pandemic would have happened whether the church was here or not. How blessed are we that we were here to reach out and provide spiritual and guidance, as well as consolation, pastoral care, and those were opportunities that we were blessed to have as a church, and myself as a pastor.